So here's a great example. When I was in the SEALs, we were at a training, just doing some shooting training, because we always, had to refresh our shooting skills. And as I was walking to the range, I sensed like a hand on my shoulder, and I sensed the word stop. And as soon as I did, a weapon discharged behind me. I felt the wind of the bullet scream by my right ear. And had I taken that next step, it would have gone in the back of my head. But of course, there was nobody there putting their hand on my shoulder and telling me. That was my gut intuition sending me a powerful signal that if I had been like ignoring it, or if my mind had been not just completely open from years of meditation already on that I probably would have walked right into that bullet.
You are listening to The New Man, Beyond the Macho Jerk and the New Age Wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
Do you trust your gut when it comes to making decisions? Is there a way to quiet the harsh critic that constantly judges you? And how can we combine the benefits of Western psychology with Eastern mysticism? Put on your scuba gear, because today we're going deep with author, entrepreneur, and former Navy SEAL commander Mark Divine. In this conversation, we discuss the power of embracing our emotions, intuition, and spirituality. If you'd like to explore these topics further, check out Mark Divine's book, Uncommon: Simple Principles for an Extraordinary Life. What book is this for you? What number?
6.
6. Okay.
Yeah, that's my 6. Actually,
right.
It's funny. I wrote this one 3 different times.
Really?
I originally wrote it, and I was going to call it Launch. It was really geared toward, people kind of setting out in life, like college grads, high school grads, people kind of in that first early confusion, period of life where they're like not quite on track yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really designed for that. And then I didn't love it, so I rewrote it, and then I was going to self-publish it, and then it kind of sat there and languished, and then COVID hit. And so I rewrote it again. I said, I'm going to get this out there. And then it sat there because we were all a little distracted, right?
Yeah.
And finally last year I was like, man, I'm going nowhere fast with this book. So I just called my publisher and said, you know what, I've got this book. I was going to self-publish. Can I send you the manuscript? They said, sure. Like, we love it. We'll take it.
And what was it about this one that made it more difficult than the others?
I think I just was distracted with a lot of life stuff and business, transformations. And I started my doctorate. So I was getting my doctorate, and I literally just had trouble giving it the attention to get it across the finish line.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I've noticed when we're writing something, like we're still, I don't know if this is true for you, but it's like whatever I'm going through, I'm not done going through that yet. I haven't I'm
not quite ready to say what this book needs to say.
Because there's a lot of depth in this. This goes far more into the interiors and some of the inner subjective stuff.
That's right. I meant it to be like a follow-up to Unbeatable Mind. In Unbeatable Mind, I introduced the 5 mountains, and this is really about how do you develop those 5 mountains and bring it all together.
Yeah. The physical, some of the mental toughness, those seem to be more straightforward. You bring your take on them. They're really, and they're strong in that regard. I think what I really enjoyed was going into the emotional, going into the intuition and the spiritual aspects of things, which a lot of people don't really touch on, especially from maybe your side of the world, where it's coming from the SEAL teams. We're kind of imagining a book from a Navy SEAL to be sack up, get your shit together, and
exactly
kind of. So to be talking about intuition, it's like the intuition, the emotional stuff. You go really into it, and I found that just regardless if it was coming from a Navy SEAL, that it was really well done and valuable. But the fact that it was also, you coming from your perspective was really, really powerful. Right. Was there a rub there for you? Like, was that difficult to bring, or did it feel more natural?
It felt very natural. I mean, that's been the crux of like my personal practice and what I teach in Unbeatable Mind. I mean, the emotional mountain is really where everyone gets stuck. And the five mountains are in that order for a reason, because physical, mental, as you just kind of alluded to, it's easy, right? For those who are really committed, it's easy. It's not easy for the average person, because they're still struggling just with their health, right? Or their weight or their diet. But for guys like you and I, and people who are like, okay, I'm going to live I'm a peak performer, I'm going to live, a good life. Well, you get yourself healthy and you get in shape and you do all the hacks and and mental toughness. Yeah, you get that, right? But there's so little information in our culture about emotional development, and it's got this stigma to it, and especially for guys, that it's hard for folk to go there, right? And they just don't know how to do it, where to go, and like I said, it's like taboo territory. But the interesting thing about the emotional work is it's either a releasement into intuitive and spirit, or it's a block. So if you don't do the work, then you don't open up to your intuitive intelligence, because the intuitive intelligence is a much more subtle energy, and it's literally drowned out or blocked by the more solid emotional energy and patterns, that get grooved into us.
Especially if we're focused on that vision board that we've got for ourselves, everything can be very external. It can be very objective, very measurable.
Right. That's right.
So much of what you're talking about is a felt sense. And
that's right.
We have to, trust is difficult to create there, because it was also that another internal voice that was like, don't do the workout, or don't make that phone call that you need to do. Don't do this. So a lot of us don't trust what's going on inside of us, or those types of things. I'm curious how we can start to bridge that and to learn to discern what's valuable and what's maybe less valuable internally if we're learning to listen.
Yeah. Well, I think the whole point is that we won't succeed if we just jump in and really try to do spiritual development or listen to our intuition without first refining the physical, mental, and emotional, right? It's almost like a Rorschach nesting doll. You have to go from the outside in to bring the inside out. And you don't really bring the inside out. It just begins to be experienced. It emerges.
Like an allowing. That's how
it's an
is.
Allowance, right?
Yeah.
The way I describe it oftentimes is there's the path of striving, right? Which is the physical training your body feels like striving. You're reaching for goals, and you're reaching for refining, the body so that it a more fit vehicle, so to speak, right? To do a little bit more deeper work. And then the mental training, again, there's outgoing path of like strengthening the ego, striving to understand your true nature, your limitations, Kokoro are, that's a big part of that. Like, I want to strive to experience something extremely challenging to see what, right? That's all like reaching, grabbing, doing, habituating. And so it's an outward kind of movement, and it's done with all the right intentions, and it's necessary, right? You're trying to understand yourself, but ultimately, again, once you start doing the emotional mountain work, you realize that the self that you're striving for isn't out there, like you alluded to. There's no amount of efforting that's going to get you where you need to go anymore. And so then you begin the path of surrender, and that's the ingoing path. And so at this stage of the development process, you're not goaling anything, right? You're not working toward anything, even though you might still call it work, but this is more appropriate at that point to call it practice. Mm-hmm. And the practice of surrender is to let go and to remove obstacles to allow that spirit and that intuitive felt sense of what the spirit is, guiding you toward to be revealed.
Let's talk about the surrender a bit, because in my personal experience, and also with the people that I work with, that developmental stage of that striving, it's kind of like, how much horsepower do I have? Let's see what I can do. That's what our 20s, maybe into our 30s, we're starting to really kind of figure that stuff out typically. And then it doesn't seem to work anymore. The juice or the reward that we got from it becomes less and less. We start to feel out of alignment. The wins are empty. We start to feel like we're doing something wrong. And I always say, no, this is just the indicator that we're heading into this next phase, and that there's a surrender aspect to it. And I think it's important that to set those expectations that this may come up. This may come up, that the striving phase doesn't quite check the boxes for you anymore. But if you try to stay on it past the due date, it can be very, very painful.
Well, that's right. There's a law of diminishing returns to it. And so the typical striver will just keep pushing harder, expecting the same results and getting fewer and fewer of those results. In fact, maybe even getting negative results in terms of like burnout or frustration. And so that becomes what used to be necessary now becomes the limiting factor.
Which can be confusing as hell if that's become a religion for me. Like if that's become dogma for me.
And in our culture, Western culture, that is dogma, right? That's really the only thing that's taught. Even psychotherapy is generally a striving path, right?
We're going to clean this up and then clean the next thing up.
You got to work on yourself. You got to clarify this and work on that, and you're just constantly raking yourself over the emotional coals, which actually strengthens those patterns, right? This, in fact, is interesting. My book, Staring Down the Wolf, was titled that way because ultimately, when you discover those negative limiting beliefs, that's what I mean by staring down the wolf. You stare down the fear wolf, and you're like, oh yeah, there's a negative conditioned pattern from a trauma, childhood trauma, or some sort of thing that happened in my life, which I didn't have the skills at the time to deal with, and so I kind of parked that emotional energy, and then we call that an emotion, and then it gets triggered. You have these patterns. I call them fear. They get triggered over and over, and they don't serve us very well. They served us back then, right, to protect us, but they don't serve us later on. So you stare that down and you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, that's interesting. I see that pattern. And now most people then, and there's a limited amount of benefit to, the therapeutic process to identify that, to talk about it, and to objectify it, let's just say. But that's where the work really needs to shift, because the more you focus on that energy, the more you're feeding that energy. And so you're keeping it alive. This is how people can go through 20 years of talk therapy and not change a thing.
Right.
Because they're just keeping
identified with it.
Yeah, they become identified. They keep that energy alive. And so the alternate path, the path of surrender, is to just turn away from it and to feed the courage wolf. And courage, it literally means heart. The root of courage is core, which means heart in French. So the courage path is to get into your heart and forgive yourself and accept that this is the way things are, and to turn toward maybe the positive, the energetic opposite, and to feed that.
Yeah.
Keep your mind on that. And then what that does is starves the energy for the fear, for the negative trauma, and starves it. And it begins to release.
Yeah, it's kind of a wallowing if we stay in that story and we stay stuck there. Eventually we have to animate and engage and move towards what we want.
That's right.
There.
That's right.
Can you, there's an aspect of this which that could look very much like denial if I don't really understand this, right? Here's the thing, I don't like this, screw it, I'm going to rebel and go the other way. But when you talk about surrender, there's an acceptance there, but that's not a resignation.
That's right.
Can you speak a little to that?
That's well said, Tripp.
I can't take credit. I think that's Tara Brock's radical acceptance.
That's well said, Tara. Yeah, denial would be ignoring, and ignoring is ignorance. And so if you're in ignorance of your traumas and emotional past, then you will live that life of quiet desperation, because those things will always kind of haunt you, right? It's going to be that shadow that just follows you around. That's why they call it shadow work. So we don't want to deny, because denial will then lead to more suppression or repression, and then that leads to more projection of it, because, if it's in you, then you're putting it outside of you. And that's why, you'll project it onto people that you don't like. Suddenly they become your boogeyman, Mm-hmm. And it's really because the energy is inside you, because the outer world is a reflection. It's a mirror. It's a reflection of your inner states, your inner energetic states. We look at it, we acknowledge it. We may not like it, right? Mm-hmm. We may go through a period of mourning or a period of victimization, but you got to get through that really quickly, because as you said, getting with courage, getting to that stage of acceptance, then you're like, oh yeah, there that is. It happened. It's not who I am. It happened for an infinite number of reasons. So get over it. Move on. Mm. So that's the surrender process, is surrender to the reality of this is what is.
This is happening.
This is happening. This is real. This is who I am. And now the question is, what are we going to do about it? Am I going to live with that shadow forever? Am I going to live wallowing in that victimization or the woe is me attitude? Or am I going to just let that shit go and forgive it? Forgive myself and forgive whatever situation, including person or persons that harmed you, and move on. And that is extraordinarily liberating. That's ultimately the path to freedom, is constantly, whenever these things come up, acknowledge it, pull it out of yourself. That's what they mean by you objectify it. Like the practice of mindfulness is extremely beneficial. This is why, I put mindfulness it could cover all 5 mountains, but it's in the mental category, because we can monitor and watch mindfully these thought patterns without engaging with them, right? This has tremendous benefits, by the way, for anybody, because you become the watcher. I call it the witness.
Right.
And those thoughts and emotions now become something that you can see from afar without, riding them like a freaking wild stallion, and letting him wreck your day, kick cat kind of thing. And so that practice also then reveals the persistent negative patterns that continually arise. They say your brain is 5 times. Fear wolf, by the way, is all ego. It's all head stuff. Mm-hmm. Even though emotional patterns can be deeply rooted in the body, the cognized experience of them is all brain stuff, not heart, right? We begin to see these patterns that are recurring. And then you can name that. You're like, oh, that's an addictive pattern because of bullying, or, that's a codependent pattern because of lying. And so you can name the pattern. And if you name the pattern, then it's something you've just objectified. Because naming things, that's an objective dualistic function, right? So we name it, and then we're like, okay, that pattern, I don't want that. That's not me. Mm-hmm. But that pattern arises. It's like cooked into my matrix, my basic matrix.
That's very nuanced there. That's not me, but it's still somewhere in me, or how
it's in the body. But for witness, when you do this work in the witness perspective, you begin to get a sense of, I am not my body, and I am not those thoughts and emotions. If you're not your thoughts and emotions, then you're not even the body, because the body is an energetic idea. It's a creation of your mind, and thoughts are a creation of the mind. So if body and thoughts are a creation of the mind, and from the witnessing perspective, you can see that you are not that, then who are you? And this is where it starts to bridge into the metaphysical and the spiritual.
Right. Yeah. Where am I taking my seat? Where am I identified?
Yeah. Where am I identified in the I amness, the witness source, or am I identified as the limited ego, which believes that I am this body in space and time, and I have these thoughts, and I am those thoughts. Mm. It's your identity, the personality, the ego. If you continue to identify with the ego, you will suffer. And it's not, doesn't make you a bad person, right? Again, 99% of humanity or more identifies as the ego. It's the makeup of this kind of game that we're in, right?
Yeah.
But if you're searching for, if you want to live an extraordinary life, like the subtitle of my book, then begin the process of refining the body and the mind, strengthening your mind so that you can look at it critically, like to polish the mirror, like the Zen, process,
right?
So that you can see truth, that you are not those thoughts and those patterns. They arise, but you're like, oh, here I am watching them. I see them. And if I am watching them, I am not them.
And who's experiencing it, right?
Yeah. And so then you can turn away from them and let the energy of those things bleed off.
Yeah.
And yet, yes, there is, still a benefit in an active process of like understanding it and forgiving, right? You could say that's an active process. And then there's the surrender process of just accepting, moving away from or forward the energies that you do want more of in your life. And those are going to be in much higher vibrational qualities, love and acceptance and whatnot. So it's a both and. It's a yin and yang kind of hand in glove approach that isn't taught well here in the Western world. We like that Western contribution of psychotherapy and shadow work is very valuable, but it's incomplete. It's half the work. But the Eastern processes that you find in Tibetan Buddhism and yoga, the Ramana Maharshi's "Who Am I" type meditation, that's the other half. And they meet when you can bring them together and work with them in that, simultaneously. Now you've got a whole process, which leads to whole mind.
One is great at identifying like the small self. Some would say the false self from a Buddhist perspective. And then, but where do I really take my ground of understanding and experience and recognizing that that is not all of who I am. But without that ground, then it's just more of the small self.
It's more of the small self, and it's always going to be limited, right? You can look at that small self as being kind of nested within the bigger self, and the more work you do, I shouldn't use the word work because it's your natural state, but the more you remove the obstacles and remove the limitations in the stuff of the ego that's blocking that, then the bigger that big ass self becomes until it's ultimately infinite.
You touched on forgiveness. You told a couple of really powerful stories in the book about coming to terms with things that you had done. And how, that guilt I just know so many people that are living in states of guilt, and kind of their life is about continuing to try to pay off that bill that they've got. And it'll never, so even if they have some good fortune, they tend to block it. They tend to push it away. There's love, there's genuine appreciation. I'm going to push that away. And then they wonder why life feels pretty hollow and empty. And it's, there's this weird place. And I thought forgiveness it's ultimately such an important part. We can talk about forgiving others, but forgiving ourselves is a pretty new concept for a lot of us. We don't even realize that. We just take it for granted that we're going to wake up and we're going to be poking knives in ourselves all day because I didn't do this and I didn't do that. And 20 years ago, I should have said this. And, we're just in this place where we can't win.
That's right. The ego can't win. It's an impossible burden to prop up the idea of being a perfect, individuated, separate self. It literally is an impossible burden. And it'll lead to, like you succinctly put, this constant second guessing. I should have done better, or I could have done better. Why do I keep doing this? Why does this keep happening to me? Woe is me. And so when you open up through this process, first, let me just back up and let's get practical. You have to be healthy to do real spiritual work. And I think that's something that's really missed in our culture, because your body and mind are not two separate things. Even though I said the body creates the mind, again, that means the body is the mind. And so if your body is broken and unhealthy and all agitated, then your mind is going to be distracted and agitated and anxious. And so if you sit down and try, because you'll notice the bulk of the work in the book, Uncommon, is besides kind of the physical mountain of, those 6 pillars of dialing in your exercise and movement patterns and your nutrition and fueling patterns and your sleep and recovery patterns, time in nature and working with community and practice and releasing stress. The rest of the work is introspective. It's moving, it's learning how to go within. And if you can't go within if your body's all messed up. And so we start there, And then that immediately begins to train the mind, because the body and mind are not two. But then we take more active a process of training the mind through concentration practice, right? Through attention control, through mindfulness, right? And through imagery work. And all of this is leading you more and more toward that openness, that opening you're looking for, where the heart begins to open. And you begin to experience that oneness, or that big S self.
Mm-hmm.
And as you do that, as I mentioned earlier, you begin to be able to see that the ego did have an impossible task. And all those things that you think you did, they couldn't not have happened based upon the context of your life.
They couldn't not have
They could
happened.
not have happened.
They were inevitable. Is that what you're saying?
They were inevitable. That's a better way of saying it.
Okay.
They couldn't not have happened.
Okay.
And so instead of like second guessing everything, you're like, oh, well, that happened. Fascinating. That's really interesting. Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
You could try to come up with a million reasons why, but you'll never really figure it out, because there's an infinite number of things that go into everything that happens. And so there's an incredible releasement that happens when you get to this place where you're like, oh my God, like that, I didn't do anything wrong.
This was going to happen.
Things just happen. This is inevitable, right?
Mm.
And so when you open up to who you really are, you begin to move, at least intellectually, at first you see beyond that. You see, oh, I see. And from that perspective, you can have incredible compassion for yourself and for others and for this whole condition, that we call life. And out of compassion, you have instant forgiveness, right? Mm-hmm. And you're right. You're not really, if you haven't forgiven yourself, then you really haven't forgiven others.
You bring up this not enough thing, which is just pervasive. And a lot of us don't recognize that that's the water we're swimming in. And I'm always interested to get somebody's take of like why the small self is obsessed with this sense of not enough. I know it makes no sense whatsoever from more of the big self perspective, where it's an infinite experience. Mm-hmm. There, but I'm just, what are the benefits? How does the small self benefit by living in not enough and constantly finding proof, validation that we are not enough?
Yeah. We are taught that we're not enough from the moment, we're born, right? Well, first of all, the first 6 years of life, the child is absolutely dependent for life on, parents. Mm-hmm. And so, but beyond that, when we move into the next few stages of development, there could be a positive teaching of abundance. And instead, or at least in the Western culture, we're taught scarcity, right? It's baked into our educational system. It's baked into our economy, right? Baked into how our parents are going to be behaving, in which we watch every nuanced detail of.
We're loved or we're not loved based on
either love or not love, or we're not going to make the rent, and there's a lot of tension around economic issues and financial issues, and then even body image issues. We're not enough. We've got to have the perfect looking body to attract the right mate, or to be perceived as successful. And so it's all based on a kind of lack. And so the ego develops literally a scarcity mentality. It takes a very wise and loving, nurturing family environment to break that. It's not necessarily common, right? It's pretty uncommon to find that. And so the other part about this is just much more kind of fundamental, like Freudian, is that the ego, you can say the ego is like it's your brain, it's your executive function. And the very necessary of the ego is to stake a claim in the world, to find our place, to be someone. And so its primary function is a protective function. And that, made a lot of sense. Of course, this is nothing new, but, people talk all the time about how it really helped us when we had to avoid the tigers and, the the next door neighbors who are coming after your food or your girlfriend.
Don't get overconfident. Don't let your guard down.
Yeah, always watching, fight or flight, all the mechanisms that are there to protect us and to help us, right? And so all of that has this very useful service until it's not useful anymore.
Yeah. Or we live in a different reality where we're just
right. We live in a different reality, right? Where the threat of getting cut off in traffic is perceived by the ego to be is about the same as it would have if you were back in the savannah and getting chased by a tiger. So you're never gonna get rid of the ego. The idea of like killing the ego is silly. Essentially, if you killed the ego, you would drop dead.
Well, it's also the only one that wants to kill the ego is the ego. So
that's right. Really well said. Exactly. The ego killing the ego. Like, no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Capital S self does not have it out. Yeah.
As you have a much lighter touch, the ego begins to diminish its hold over you until you see it just as a bunch of patterns and ideas. I don't get moved by much at all. I mean, it doesn't mean I am not really passionate about things. I am. It doesn't mean I'm not compassionate about the suffering of others. I am. I feel it much more acutely than in the past. I just don't take it as seriously anymore because I see that is just a big drama. It's the play, right? It's Lila, the dance of life. And so I recognize that those things are just happening, again, for the infinite number of reasons. And I don't need to be internally all caught up in the drama.
Yeah.
I can be watching the stage, watching from the audience section.
I think if we've done enough mindfulness work and we've done enough witnessing work, at least how my brain occurs to me is that it's like cable news. There's always a lead story.
Yeah, there's always going to be some drama.
There's not like, hey, we're good today. There's just always today.
Yeah.
Today in Tripp's world.
If you're looking for everything to get perfect all of a sudden, like the next election cycle, it's all going to be perfect after that. Okay, yeah. Sure.
No, but it's just there's always a lead story. There's always something that wants to take that attention and perpetuate this drama, perpetuate this play, as you say, and that waiting for it to be done is just great, great suffering. So. But yeah, like it's just like that's always happening. It's always going to happen. It's just
that's right.
Baked in.
You want to rise above the battleground. One of the metaphors that I use in my with my unbeatable mind tribe when I lead them through meditations is that your true self is like a mountain, immovable. You're immovable as a mountain, and those thoughts and emotions and dramas are like clouds passing by. They're there. You don't deny that they're there, but they're not real. Like you can't touch a cloud. It's like a dream. It's there, but it's not really real. You don't wake up from a dream and be like, oh my God, I really was, flying through, the Himalayas. It was a dream.
It felt like you were.
Yeah. It felt like you were, yeah. And so you begin to see kind of the thoughts and the emotions of the drama similar to a dream. It's like they're not really real, even though they have some substance to them, and you just let them drift by. And sometimes it's a freaking hailstorm, and winds are whipping, and boy, I tell you what, if you stop being the mountain, you could be swept up in it really quickly. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to remain immovable in those storms, but it's possible. Through practice, right? You just watch it and be like, oh, that's interesting, and this too shall pass.
How is this different from dissociation? Because as Ken Wilber talks about, we got the pre-trans fallacy, right? So if I'm in a trans-rational state and I'm able to take the perspective that you're talking about, I could also be in a pre-rational state, which is like, I'm just going to unplug from this and I'm,
disassociate.
I'm actually dissociating instead of.
Right. In fact, Tripp, that is, and Ken was a student to point that out, that is one of the big traps for people on a spiritual process. And so you do like that spiritual bypass, and it leads to disassociation or this feeling of I'm over here and everybody else is over there. And then you're disengaged from life. And that's not That's not it, right? I'm not talking about being disengaged. I'm talking about being non-attached. But non-attachment is, it's different than disengagement. Non-attachment is not something you do, right? It's not even a practice. It's something that occurs as a result of practice.
I'm going to get non-attached today.
Yeah, I'm going to work on my non-attachment.
I want to 10x my non-attachment.
That's awesome. Right. So, if something needs to be done, you do it. But just don't get caught up in the secondary and tertiary dialogue and judging about it. It's really about judgment, right? It is what it is. Let go and let God, right? And there's tons of little, pithy sayings that really point to this idea. You're not getting caught up in the drama. And as you do that, you stay in that center. You stay quiet. It was Punjab who said, it's not an exact quote, but something to the effect that silence is the most important thing for you. Don't waste time not doing it. And being in silence is akin to being immovable as a mountain, right? When you practice, when you train yourself to be utterly still, right? Like that song, "Be Still and Know That You Are God." Yeah, that stillness allows your natural state to be present. And in your natural state, you see that all that stuff is just the parts of life.
Right.
And in that natural state, you're not disengaged with life. You are life.
You can play with life at that point.
I call it curious non-attachment, right? You're curious. You're playful with it. But you have a light touch. You're just not like Kim Wilberson. You're not convinced by the stories and the drama.
Yeah. Let's segue into intuition here. I'm not going to catch intuition. I'm not even going to be aware of anything that we're talking about if I'm in this loud world, right? If I'm constantly got stuff pumping into my head, I'm listening to 6 podcasts a day, and I'm always, just up to date on all this stuff and where I should be and what are this and that. So first off, can you describe intuition to someone who I have no idea what that is. What is intuition?
Intuition is, I don't want to use, I guess you could say it's cognized, but a better word is understanding the messages from spirit, or even you could say from non-physical to non-physical.
The unseen, yeah.
The unseen. And so we have a few different ways that we experience intuition, right? Let me just pin that and say, generally, like if you search intuition, like if you do ChatGPT, what is intuition? You're going to get what objective science thinks intuition is, which is pattern recognition, right? That, you've seen something a number of times, and so you just know, you don't have to think about it. You can intuitively just do it. I think that's a form of, like, I've heard it called synthetic intelligence, right? I don't think it's intuition. This is why language is so important, to really get clear about what we're talking about. Intuition is it's coming from within, and recognizing patterns of something objective is not coming from within, right? It's just synthetic intelligence. You're synthesizing things. It's helpful. It happens through experience. It happens through life, menstory, 10,000 hours, all that type of stuff. Well, the type of intuition I'm speaking of is very subtle. It often gets drowned out, like we said earlier, with the emotional body, or even just with the physical body not having the sensitivity, because it's out of shape, or it's out of whack, or it's dis-ease. Mm-hmm. So probably the most primordial is the gut, right? So the gut, now we know that, we have neurons in our gut. And so our gut is a brain. We call it the gut brain. And the gut brain receives a lot of information from your biome. Most of the genes in your body are in the biome. And those bugs are connected in ways that we don't understand to the the air quote outside world. And they can sense danger, right? And they can tell you if you're eating the wrong things, right? A lot of your moods are coming from, the biome.
Right.
And, communicating through the neurons in your gut through the enteric nervous system. So intuition at that level is to be very sensitive to what your gut brain is telling you. So here's a great example. When I was in the SEALs, we were at a training, just doing some shooting training, because we always, had to refresh our shooting skills. And I was up at Camp Pendleton, and it was like 5 a.m. and, this is not like Navy SEAL BUDS training where I'm like instructors on your back all the time. This is, casual. I'm with my platoon. And so I'm going to be kind of the first group up at the range. And so I'm walking toward the range, cold in the morning, And as I was walking to the range, I sensed like a hand on my shoulder, and I sensed the word stop. And as soon as I did, a weapon discharged behind me, and a bullet I felt the wind of the bullet scream by my right ear. And had I taken the next step, it would have gone in the back of my head. And, I almost turned, I of course turned to look at who was trying to kill me, and it was my friend Chris, unintentionally, accidental discharge.
You don't sound like much of a friend.
The look on his face was precious. He's like, holy, I just did that? Like, yeah, you just did that. But of course there was nobody there putting their hand on my shoulder and telling me that was my gut intuition sending me a pretty powerful signal that if I had been like, ignoring it, or if my mind had been not just completely open from years of meditation already on that I probably would have walked right into that bullet. That's an example of gut intuition.
You said, I want to point something out. You said you sensed the word stop. You didn't hear it, is what I'm gathering. It's not a voice. And I think that that's right, really something to underline here. That's
right. I'm glad you brought that up. Intuition is not experienced like a loud clamoring voice in your head. Yeah, do this.
Right.
No. That's like, how do you tell the difference between a bias pattern and intuition? Is the bias pattern is that voice in your head. Whereas this intuition is experienced as a very soft whisper. Now, this whisper was felt very strongly because it was a matter of life and but it had a very different quality than a voice in my head saying, Mark, you better stop. Someone's about to shoot you. Right? It was immediate. It stopped me in time and space, and it stopped me from moving. Another really, and it's important to pay attention, right? So I haven't always been great at paying attention to these. In fact, this other story I'll tell you about is when I kind of said, screw it, I've got to pay attention to these. And this is like 2012, and I was training for the CrossFit Games, Masters Division, and I was doing a workout called 3 Bars of Death, which is, I know, right? It sounds great, right?
Sounds inviting.
Sounds inviting. So you go 10 repetitions of each, 9, 8, 7, all the way down to 1. And the 3 exercises are bench press, deadlift, and power clean. I think after on the second round, an image flashed in my head of me falling on the ground, having injured my back. And I should have listened to it. Should have stopped right there. But I had a coach, pushing me on, and I had the energy of the games, and, the blah, blah, blah. And I was like, this isn't going to happen to me. I'll just pay attention. I'll be, perfect form, blah, 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 the deal. And sure enough, in the very last deadlift, point, down I go.
The moment hubris is revealed, it's always too late.
Absolutely. I was like, you know what, Mark? You knew that was going to happen, and yet your ego got in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that it's a felt sense, because I think that can help point us to this. I think we all have this. It's just a matter of clearing out the space.
Getting the rubble out of the way.
Getting the noise out of the way.
Opening up. I consider it like an opening. You've heard of Ken Wilber saying, wake up, grow up, and then he added clean up, which is about your emotional cleaning up, and then showing up, which is like you show up in the world, engaged but not attached. Well, I would say that intuition, he needs to add opening up. So waking up is waking up to the story that you've been living and saying, okay, that's not who I really am. Growing up is the working through the stages of development, becoming integrated or spiritual human being, having a human existence, and recognizing that I amness, right? And cleaning up is like taking care of the shadow, like we've been talking about earlier, like getting that stuff out of the way, make sure it's not going to become the limiting factor in your life anymore. And that has both that active and that passive process, the yin yang, striving, and then the surrender. But opening up, that's opening up to the voice of God within you, the voice of your reason for being on this planet. And so that you have to open up to the gut intelligence, and then the heart intelligence is the second one. Heart intelligence is, we also now know that the heart is a brain. And so heart intelligence is experienced, as like empathy and the ability to really, really, truly take the lived perspective of other beings and to legitimately feel the sameness instead of the differences. This is how we develop deep connection or love for other people.
Right.
We are open-hearted about it. And so then it changes our relationship with others. It changes our language and how we communicate. And we take much more responsibility for how we speak and for how our words are going to land with others. Heart intuition helps you know when things are not going well, either with yourself or with others, so that we can, render some help, be of service.
Yeah. And again, it might feel like something's wrong. It might feel like something's wrong if I'm getting that signal.
Yeah.
And I can be like, let me push that away. What if I turn into it? What if I turn into it?
Allow it. Just allow that opening. Allow the feeling. It might be uncomfortable at first, but like we say in the SEALs, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And then you'll begin to understand the messages more. I think the heart is much more of that, like you said, you will experience it, but it's not experienced like an emotion so much as a softening. You've heard like hardening or closing the heart is a contraction. It's a heart.
Right.
Opening the heart is a softening. You feel warm. It's an opening. And you're like, oh my God, this person is actually suffering. And and you can feel you feel their suffering. You open to it. And then essentially the range of experience of love expands exponentially. This is what, Sanskrit has 67 different words for love. We have one.
Right. Yeah. It's very nuanced. We got some possibilities.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I use the term love in those 67 or, infinite. It's infinite variety.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ultimately, at the most expansive perspective, it's love for all sentient beings.
And we can't do that when we're defensive, locked down, protective, like it's all me. This whole path that you're describing is going from where I'm kind of center stage all the time, that this is all about me, to relaxing where I'm taking my seat in this much bigger aspect of myself.
To use Dr. David Hawkins' terms, you move from content, which is all about me, to context, which is everythingness. And you situate yourself in the everythingness.
And it's going to feel like death to that small self. Like, wait a second, I need to be unique and special. And
Yeah. The world did revolve around me. But, not anymore. And boy, it's You're not losing anything, you're gaining everything. Because suddenly that little me doesn't have to prop up the universe.
Which is a gigantic pain in the ass.
Exactly.
It's way too hard.
It's an impossible task.
It's impossible. Right. Like, I mean, my takeaway there is like, if it feels that hard, we've got room to relax and open and not make it about ourselves.
You're trying too hard. So just let go.
Yeah. Can I be supported here? Can I open here?
Right.
You know, what am I protecting? Do I need to protect that much?
Open the heart. Just open the heart. And so but it's not easy. It's like,
no.
They don't sell a device to help you open your heart. You do it through that surrender, through the forgiveness, through silence. This is what we mean by being present, right? The ego will look at presence as just like, oh, I'm just not thinking. Well, you are likely going to be thinking, because that's what happens. Thinking happens. You're able to just be present and witness while thoughts are occurring, and allowing the experience to be experienced. And so, if let's say you're with others, or your team is suffering, you're just with them, holding the space for that suffering to run its course, and being an example that you can be strong and calm and centered in whatever shitstorm is happening.
Yeah. I think it's a great compass heading. My small self is going to think it's about being more powerful, more unique, more separate, more protected, more narrow.
Right.
And it's the other way. What's going to allow me to feel more open, more relaxed, more of my heart, more accepting, more forgiving. Right. And I think just having that broad sense of contrast there.
That's a great contrast. And again, it's difficult, especially for guys. This is why Brene Brown's work is so powerful, but I got to admit, even I chafe at the term vulnerable.
Yeah.
So guys don't like that. Great, just use authentic.
Don't be weak. Yeah, or transparent. Just
transparent.
Open.
Just use it. Rename it, right?
Yeah.
In a way that makes sense to you. The point is, it doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you strong. Like one of the metaphors I used to use back in the day with my SEAL Fit trainees is like, there's always going to be the massive storms, and you're stepping into a career where there's going to be some massive tsunamis that come your way, like unbearable. And if a tsunami comes, would you rather be the mighty oak? That's like the old David Goggins, just push through this. You want to be the mighty oak? Or would you rather be the reed that just lays down, and when the water passes, it just pops back up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so obviously the message there is, there's a time to be an oak and there's a time to be the reed. And the reed energy is heart energy, and the oak energy is mind energy. So you got to strengthen both, but strengthen them in the right direction. And the heart's direction is opening, and the mind's direction is clarity. Not, away from, the limited ego, I am this, I am that, but toward clarity of who you really are. So that's the heart's intuition. And then one more trip is, the yogis have talk about direct perception. Direct perception is when you suddenly know something without having any reason to know it. So you could, another term, I think I got this from our friend Michael Osterlund, is trans-rational intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that because it transcends any rational basis. Like, you didn't read it somewhere. It's not synthetic knowledge, right? You just know something without knowing why or how you.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens when you train your mind to quiet down and to move beyond. And so that happened. Like, my examples of that is, I tell it in my book, both Unveil Mind, I tell the story a little bit, but more in the way of the SEAL, about how I became a Navy SEAL. I mean, I was barreling toward a job in finance, and then maybe go back and run the family business. And I was fortunate enough to find Zen training when I was 21, while I was getting my MBA and working at Cooper's and Library and doing all that stuff. You've heard that story. I think we talked about that. And sitting on that meditation bench, about over a year and a half into my practice, I began to have transrational intuition, right? So I'd trained my mind to like be radically focused, and then the witnessing began to open up to, through that process, so I could see the story of my life and could see that I was actually living a story that wasn't my life. And I opened up to the possibility that there was some other story, some other reason that I was on this planet. And then when when my mind or ego was comfortable enough allowing me to just surrender and to kind of like have those drop-offs when you meditate, where you're like, everything stops, but you're still perfectly aware, but there's no thought. I always come back with some sort of gem, some sort of insight. And that's when I learned that I was meant to be a warrior. And that's an example of transrational intuition.
And that can usually be confronting when we get those.
For sure.
I mean, every time I've had those insights, there's a voice that usually accompanies it, which is like, oh God, come on, really?
I know, really? Look at how much work I put into this other thing.
It's not like, yeah, right on. That's what I wanted to hear. It was always just like, oh, really?
Yeah, the ego will resist it for sure.
Oh, and
in fact, that's a great,
usually an indicator
that's a great indicator that intuition should be followed, or at least investigated.
Yeah.
Much deeper,
Yeah, there's usually like, oh, that sounds pretty dangerous. Maybe we should just kind of hang out here, ignore that one.
Stay in safe territory. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I feel like we could talk all day. You've got so much stuff to unpack here. I want to be mindful of your time, but it's always great to catch up with you and also see what you're bringing to the world. I feel really grateful for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate that you're willing to speak up and bring these thoughts and these ideas and insights from your own practice.
Thank you, Tripp. I appreciate you, and I love I love having these conversations. You're just a fantastic interviewer, and I could tell that you are also deeply committed to your work and also being a service in the world. So thank you.
Thank you, man.
If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.